Psychologists of Reddit, what made you realize you were treating a psychopath? Clinical psychologist here. At first I didn't know. If anything, given the context, he was more put together than most of my patients. The subject of his criminal past came up. I only knew he had served prison time some years before, not what he was in for. I had met with him a month or two when this came up. Turns out it was 2 separate sentences served. Both were for rape. In both cases he was the exact thing we are afraid of, a guy lurking in a dark alley jumping a drunk girl. He told me about these things as if he was talking about the weather. When it dawned on me that he expressed no remorse or guilt whatsoever, I got the same cold, gut-wrenching kind of primal fear you feel when you're out for a walk and almost step on snake. I am a mental health professional working in corrections, max security facility. In my experience, psychopaths will have this predatory stare, especially when they are trying to manipulate you. It is completely unnerving and hard to describe to someone unfamiliar with this population. They also tend to be narcissistic and overly charming, making a point to be overly friendly with you. I know this look. I knew a drug dealer and he had this look to him. He would smile and try to be charming and engaging, but his eyes said something else. Usually when people smile, like a real smile, their eyes seem to have life and joy, but his seemed almost dead inside, almost like snake eyes. He'd try every trick to get you to like him, but something always seemed off. Adding to that, he always tried to do something sort of pushy to get his way, like asking for hugs and trying to force it even when I'd say no. It was always very subtle and calculated. I think that the eyes are always the most telling when you meet someone like that. They always seem dead and cold inside, even if they try their hardest to seem normal. When I was a student, we had an interview with a lady that killed her baby child with a handgun because it cried so much that she couldn't take it. At first we weren't told that she was a psychopath, and we were just told to listen to her side of the story. She was reading us from her journal that she made while she was in the institution. Not once did she mention that she was sad that her baby died, or how what she did was bad. She was just reading angry toughs about her husband that left her and turned her in the police about what she did. She was justifying the killing because the baby was so unbearable, and once she mentioned that she was angry and mad that her husband did not believe her, that she didn't have any other choice but to kill the baby. She was very smart and well spoken, and the whole time she was speaking she was trying to make us feel sorry for her for being locked up. We later learned that sometimes she was lying about not killing her baby and other times just brag about it, depending on who she was speaking with. Very normal looking person and very good speaker. Edit, wow, was not expecting this much upvotes. So to answer some of your questions. I am not from the US and I don't think her name will matter to any of you. She was not schizophrenic nor had postpartum psychosis. If she did, she would have felt any kind of remorse about what she did, which she did not. When I said normal person, I meant it in a way that if I was talking to her in any other situation but this, in a mental institution, I would have no idea that she is a psychopath. She killed her baby only for one simple reason: at the moment it just wouldn't stop crying. She didn't try to hide it or anything. At first she lied to her husband that it was by accident, but then she admitted. When telling that, he kept thinking about how killing people would be more fun than lame animals, stray cats and dogs and everything else he could catch. Only 11 years old. My mum worked with a boy, 12 to 13 at the time, who had killed animals. He'd raped a sheep then cut its throat. He'd molested his younger brother. He was big for his age and wouldn't be allowed to be alone with female staff because he would always try to manipulate them and test his strength against them in subtle ways, i.e., he'd try to hug them but squeeze to see if they were strong enough to get out of it. They would often find drawings in his room of women tied up and mutilated. He wasn't allowed human-like toys anymore because he'd always destroy them, hang them, tie them up. The staff have all said it's only a matter of time before he actually kills a human, and at present there's nothing they can do about it because when he hits 16 he'll no longer be in their care. They had a certain degree of sympathy for him due to his upbringing. His mother was a junkie and would often sell him and his brother to pedophiles. They'd pick the boys up in a car, take them away, abuse them and then bring them back to her. Disgusting. Current psychologist working in a prison here. I've worked with 3 individuals I dare say would have met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder within the last 2 weeks. One commonality is that they use behaviors as tools to benefit only themselves. Self-harm not because they wish to hurt themselves but to use it as a tool to lure staff into the cell to incite violence / gain extra medication / be sent to the SHU which comes with a status. Not a psych but I was in the room where my mum was being evaluated. Well, I wasn't in the room, it was like a police interrogation room with the one-way glass. I was there because they needed to interview me for an outsider's perspective. Anyways, my mum got arrested on suspicion to commit a violent crime. To set the scene, she was handcuffed to a table and she was pissed. She's always had volatile anger issues due to heavy drug and alcohol use. She was being talked to, questioned, all this other stuff. I was there for about 3 hours. She kept running this lady in circles to divert her from the actual problem. She was insanely calm answering questions about various things that would scare a normal person. She barely showed empathy for anything and it was terrifying for me to watch. I knew she wasn't right in the head anyways, she was abusive to both my brother and I. But seeing how she handled the situation at hand, I'm glad I got out of there or it would have gotten much worse. I haven't talked to her in about 4 years but she's tried to get in contact. I can't trust her and don't think I ever will again. Not a psychologist, but a nurse who sees way too many psych cases. One time I had a PT who was brought in after trying to break into a family's house while they were home. He was on my telemetry unit because his electrolytes were out of whack and he was acting like he didn't remember trying to bust into an entire family's house with them home. He was getting antsy, but the hospital I worked at had a stupid fall risk policy that kept patients in bed, even if they were young / healthy / capable of being responsible for their fall. Mental health patients like to pace, especially when they start to feel like they're using it. So, anyway, I'm trying to keep dude in bed because if his feet touched the floor a loud alarm would go off, pushing his crazy ass closer to the edge. So, I'm in there trying to talk to him and de-escalate. We're talking and he tells me he is a bad person, that his cat was mutilated and his sister asked what happened to it and he told her the dog did it. But, he told me that his secret is that he did it. He killed the cat so bad that it looked like a dog ripped it to pieces. He also shared with me that he knew what he was doing when he tried breaking into the family's home, and that he wants to hurt people. Of course, I shared this info with the hospitalist and the psychologist and, naturally, he was discharged free and clear the next day. No follow-up with the law or outpatient psych. Gotta love it. You feel it in your gut first. Using a validated measure, and constructing a thorough case history to discuss in supervision, this is how you test your gut feeling. But you feel it often quite quickly. It tends to begin with just a sense that something is off. When you're doing therapy with someone, we tend to build up quite a strong rapport with people. So there's lots of micromimicry going on, and you start to tune in quite deeply to unconscious body language. When you're in this state, sometimes you just start to feel very uneasy and you can't articulate verbally exactly why yet. This is often because of subtle micro-expressions, super fast flashes of emotion, lasting fractions of a second, that we perceive, but don't consciously register. You see flashes of contempt-related emotions and burglar smiles, basically emotions related to dominance and deception. The next thing you'll notice is a lot of use of projection going on. This starts quite quickly, usually in an assessment session. I mean, as an aside, being assessed by someone else can feel quite threatening to anyone's self-image, let alone a psychopath's. Quite predictably there will be status challenges, asking you about your credentials, your experience etc., and then often some put-downs and digs with plausible deniability, e.g. joking that all psychologists are mad themselves, or just turning the tables by asking who's the maddest person you've ever treated. You start to feel on the back foot and like you're now being assessed by them. As time continues, they will attribute a lot of their own emotions to you as the projection deepens. E.g., commenting that you look sad, asking if you're okay, or conversely asking why you got angry just then. As time passes, their affect turns from micro-expressions to more overt dominance displays, leaning back, smirking, getting up and striding around, etc. By this point your initial gut feeling is getting more supportive evidence and it's time to bust out the validated measures. The biggest sign of all is a general unwillingness to show any vulnerability at all, or to be in a one-down position. The engagement will be superficial, often pally or matey, with lots of banter and joking, always flying close to the wind of outright mockery and contempt. They will start subtly and increasingly become overt in their need to control and dominate the therapy sessions. If the therapist maintains an aloof control, the ante may keep being raised and even end up with overt intimidation of the therapist. Okay, so what's the difference between psychopathy and narcissism? People seem to be only focusing on how most psychopaths are narcissistic, but they're not really mentioning anything else. I'm autistic, and, because of my very low empathy, I come across as mildly psychopathic. However, I have very low self-esteem. I do not manipulate people, as far as I can tell. My former roommate, on the other hand, was a narcissist to a trash-steep T, to the point where she abused and manipulated me in so many ways over the course of a year. Yet the descriptions in this thread are conflating. So what other traits of a psychopath are there? What differentiates us? I read that the lack of empathy in autism and the lack of empathy in psychopathy are actually different things. I can't remember the specific terms used, but it was something like cognitive empathy vs what we would think of as real empathy. Understanding vs feeling. A psychopath would have high cognitive empathy, meaning they can read what other people are feeling, but low real empathy, meaning they can't feel it themselves. This means they can do what they need to make someone feel what is useful to them without feeling any of the negative emotions themselves. Autism is supposedly the opposite. You feel what other people feel, but you can't process the emotions like most people. So you can't make the connection that you taking action A leads to someone feeling emotion B, at least not intuitively, but you still feel the emotional consequences even if you don't understand why. This is what leads to being overstimulated. I don't know if that's accepted science, but it made sense to me. The eyes when they believe they're supposed to put on an emotion. You have to understand. It's going ouch when you bang your funny bone, even though it doesn't hurt, because all your life, people have cried out in pain when they banged their elbow. You meet enough people like that and you find yourself hating any obligational situation in your life when you have to lie, like being asked how you are and saying good when you're not, simply because all you can associate it with, is them. This thread is interesting, so I thought I'd contribute. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a criminologist. Obviously it's not the same sort of thing and I've never been in a clinical situation, but you might be interested in some related experiences. Note here that I'm going to be very careful with my language in order to maintain professional integrity. Apologies for the stilted language. I've been to a couple of prisons for academic stuff and work. These are not actually all that interesting, because I knew what the people in there were for and it wasn't as if I was surprised that some of them were psychopathic. But those would be my first experiences. But my area of professional and academic expertise is child sexual victimization. I've very occasionally seen psychopaths in the making, as it were. Victims who have been so terribly victimized and neglected that you can see them setting out on the path of an abuser or other type of criminal. It wasn't my responsibility to intervene, and I don't have any expertise in that area of things, but knowing the case histories, it was sad to watch. I've talked to a few police officers, social workers, and so forth about a few of them. It's like watching a large tree toppling in slow motion. You know it's going to crash into the ground, but there's not much you can do about it. I have met, in a professional capacity but in a roundabout sort of way, as it's not the usual stuff I do, the relative of a serial killer who was also once a suspect. I came away from that meeting knowing with certainty that they were the guiding hand behind the crimes of the serial killer. The police were pretty sure as well, but there was simply no evidence. Both are now deceased, and frankly I'm not going to shed any tears for them. There was definitely familial abuse there as well. I have encountered some persons, a very small number, that were psychopathic and quite smart. This was through working within my field. One of these persons indicated that they were abusive towards animals in lieu of, or to work up to, children. I'm not going to repeat it, but what they said was something that haunts me to this day, and I haven't even been able to repeat to my closest friends or even my psychologist. Another one of these persons escaped justice. A very, very smart person. It was no one's fault, the investigation was excellent, the police were great, everything lined up and a lot of justice was achieved. That person, however, escaped justice by being very, very smart. They were responsible for very serious, sustained offending and would definitely be classed as a psychopath. Last, I met a friend of a person who used to be within my social circle who was also victimized in their childhood. I have a suspicion, without any solid evidence, that they have committed serious crimes. They hold down a professional job and are very successful in life. From the standpoint of someone who cannot diagnose psychopathy and was not treating or analyzing them, but has studied it, I would say that they lack any real empathy or conscience. A lot of their emotions, but not all, seemed to me to be a simulated and conscious act. The abuse they suffered was of the worst possible kind. As a result, they were wary of most men, but warmed up to me a little due to the work I do. Abuse and neglect during the formative years seem to be a very common thread for many criminals and psychopaths. That said, I dare say there are some who are just wrong in the head, but I, personally, haven't encountered any of that sort. I'll end this already too long post with a word of caution to everyone reading. It's very easy to be horrified of the actions of psychopaths and criminals. It's easy to be fascinated by their psychology. But these are people, just like we are. Most of the time, their actions can be traced back to what happened to them, how they interpreted it, how they learned from their life experiences. They're but for the lottery of birth. There aren't any evil monsters living under bridges or in forests, it's just us. We bear responsibility for the evil of psychopaths as a society, as communities, and nations. We create the conditions for crime and evil. We are the monsters, and we create the monsters. As Oscar Wilde put it, we are each our own devil, and we make this world our hell. When describing some of the awful things he had done to people, he didn't express remorse, regret, or even anger, he expressed disdain. He was disdainful of people that he had irreparably harmed because he did not get enough out of it, he used them for his own ends and he genuinely believed that they had failed him. I typed out a long response to this but then deleted it because I couldn't really describe it without giving too many details away. One thing I will say is that psychopaths aren't all your classic murderous criminals. Sometimes the nicest people you'll meet are psychopaths, and it's all an act to manipulate you to do what they want, or think a certain way about them, because that makes them feel like they've won and or are superior to you. Watch out for the nice guys. This is my experience with the only one I have known, in high school. She was a very superficial person, and I don't mean she liked makeup and fancy things, I mean every interaction was very surface level. After knowing someone for years you expect to know a little about their internal life, but not her. I heard about everything she bought, the drugs she'd done, remember, high school, ugh, boys and what they'd done, never what she felt about it. Every conversation felt like she was listing her credentials. Standing off to the side you could see her put on a face appropriate to the situation. Hanging out with her was exhausting because you could never just hang out and talk. I think she knew that those interactions were the ones where people could clock her, because she would sometimes be flippant or glib about things that would make people side-eye her. So every time we hung out we had to be doing something, or more often doing several things. Smoking pot, drinking, watching a movie, listening to music, playing a board game, dancing, eating, all at once. And then she murdered someone. Just kidding. She's not a criminal, has never been in trouble with the law at all, she leads a very normal life. She's child-free, she has a husband, a job. She's very functional, if a little manipulative. Her friend group has grown smaller. She is possessive of her twin sister and her husband. Her identical twin sister is not like her, she's a very compassionate and kind person. She's told me that her sister did kill a pet when they were young, playing with it like a doll, and did not show any guilt or remorse, just rage when it was taken away. They didn't get her any treatment, just didn't get any more pets, and there was never another incident. They are close in a superficial way, they go out to eat once a week, they comment on each other's Facebook, but normal twin has told me mostly she feels like she has to take care of her twin to make sure she doesn't do anything bad or get into trouble. So yeah, they're not all spooky monsters, some are just stealth, going about their life not feeling feelings. I'm not a psychologist, but I know a few, have studied it extensively, and my sister works with MH in the police. He told me he tried to care how people feel, but he doesn't know how that would even come about. How do you know you care for someone? How do you not feel indifferent? He just said he has 3 emotions: indifference, anger, and pity. So after reading a lot of these, it's worth mentioning the following. Psychologists rarely even use the term psychopath anymore. Those disorders which would fall under the umbrella of psychopathy are preferred to the otherwise generic and easily confused term of psychopath. Note how many people frequently conflate psychopathy with narcissism. There's a narcissism personality disorder which fits many models of psychopathy, but not all so-called psychopaths are narcissists. It often doesn't take training in psychology to spot so-called psychopaths. Formal training is needed to diagnose and treat it, but our brains are highly tuned to pick up on small things that our higher consciousness is often otherwise unaware of. This isn't to say that we should purely trust our gut, we're more often wrong than we'd like to admit, but how we feel about first impressions is often very important. Far more people exhibit features of various psychopathic personality disorders than most realize. The vast majority of these people, however, live fairly ordinary, productive lives and don't exhibit violent tendencies. It has even been argued that psychopaths are an important evolutionary element, giving us people who can detach themselves from the human experience in order to provide valuable insights or behaviors the rest of us couldn't fathom. Most of us will go through periods in our lives in which we often exhibit many symptoms of a personality disorder. But these are merely moments, they don't truly impact our lives in the way that a true disorder does. Not a psychologist but a counselor. They were talking about a disagreement they'd had with their partner. An accidental spillage of water onto some electronics, it could honestly happen to anyone. As calmly as if he was describing, I don't know, changing a channel, he started saying how he pinned his partner up against the wall and started trying to strangle her. No emotion, no change of tone. Just as if it were a normal thing. I was a trainee at the time and not qualified to deal with DV, needless to say I transferred the client to another therapist. However, I was not allowed to end the session and had to sit with him for another 20 minutes. I've never been so scared in my life. I felt like a small prey animal trapped in the room with a predator. He just didn't care. However, if you met him you'd think he was just a normal, successful kinda average dude. I am 99% sure he was a sociopath, because he kept trying to get certain reactions out of me, kept changing his tactics, kept trying to charm me, and when I wouldn't rise to it became weirdly, coldly irritated. I've never had a client like it before or since. Not a psychologist, but from my experience of dating a psychopath, didn't know until years in. A lot of what appears as emotion is simply mirroring emotions they see others exhibit and how they believe is the socially appropriate way to respond, whether or not they actually feel that way. This is how they blend in and appear normal to the average person. They are narcissistic, and everything revolves around them. They are always able to place blame on other people, nothing is ever their fault. However, anything positive in their lives or others' lives is because of them. Because they are narcissists, they believe they are much more important than they actually are. They have strong influence over others because of their ability to feel nothing when manipulating others, and this is how they exert control over others. They will do whatever it takes in order to come out on top of a situation with no actual regard for others' lives or feelings. They may fake their feelings or reactions to continue to manipulate those around them, and they get pleasure over having control over other people and feeling like they're pulling all the strings.